Hello everyone, Yoshi the Oreo here. Today I wanted to do a video in regards of Marxist praxis being used in terms of subverting private property rights and consent in order for them to push their political agenda upon America. Now, to the philosophical illiterate, and I'm not saying that to demean you, just to say that some people don't understand philosophy or read philosophy. What is a Marxist? And what do I mean by praxis? Well, in terms of praxis, it's just the Latin way of saying putting into practice, putting something that you believe into practice, into the world, or into society. Now, when it comes to Marxists, a lot of you may hear the word woke a lot. Well, that is what woke is. Woke is cultural Marxism. Woke is putting Marxism into practice, putting it into praxis. And one of the core, or a couple of the core beliefs of Marxism is the abolition of private property rights and the abolition of consent, which can be found in the Communist Manifesto. Now, when you hear that up front, you're probably thinking, now, who's going to agree to the idea of having their private property rights and their consent violated? Well, that's a good point. No one in their right mind would allow someone to violate their private property rights or their ability to consent to things that they wouldn't consent. However, Marxists, in terms of the woke or woke right, they found a way to weaponize the intentions of people's morality against them in order for them to violate and to curtail your private property rights and your ability of consent, such as an example of the left in terms of Black Lives Matter, where they use social justice, a real economical or social issue within our country in terms of the United States, in order for them to circumvent your private property rights and to circumvent your consent for their movement and their ideology to transform your private property rights or to appropriate or to subvert your private property rights or your platform as a means to uphold their political beliefs. It's the same as the right, because the far right does the exact same thing. So what's an example of that? Their example is using the social movement of white straight males in America are under attack, and that freedom of speech is under attack, and they use and weaponize freedom of speech to curtail or to subvert your private property rights and to violate your consent. And if you do not agree with their social movements or their demands to rectify those social events, then you are the label of ultimate evil, such as when it comes to the left, that means you are a racist, or if it comes to the right, that means you side with the Jews and that makes you a dirty Zionist. After you deconstruct it, does not make any sense. How does it make you a racist for a person who wants to uphold their private property rights, nor do you want to be coerced out of your ability of being able to mutually consent to things that you may agree with or you can disagree with as well. And the Marxists, whether they be on the right or the left, understand that people know that they have rights, but they don't know how to exercise those rights. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me deconstruct that a little bit further. Let's say people have weightlifting equipment, but they don't know the proper etiquette or the proper positioning on how to use that weightlifting equipment. Let's say, for instance, using a 25-pound dumbbell and using it to do curls with your arms. A person who doesn't understand the proper etiquette of doing curls with a dumbbell, but think the proper etiquette to do curls with a dumbbell would be using your legs and swinging your hip to use the momentum to lift the curl ball up just halfway with your arm, and you're just using that momentum with your whole body to move the dumbbell up with the arm, but that's not how you properly exercise with the dumbbell. In order for you to do a curl, which is the proper way of a curl, is to use your elbow and your forearm to lift the dumbbell from a lower position to a higher position, and then slowly lift that back down with the forearm and your elbow working together, and then you just repeat that motion over and over and over. The latter is the proper way of exercising your freedom of speech, while the former is the improper way of exercising your freedom of speech, and that improper way can also lead to injuries to yourself, but also injuries and severe bodily or even death to other people around you if you're not careful with how you're actually doing it. But that's the uniqueness and the unique property of that misuse that the Marxists have discovered. Well, it's been discovered for quite some time, but the whole point of it is that incorrectness is used as a shield in order for them to attack you with it, but at the same time have an excuse to fall back on, to be like, well, I just don't know what I'm doing, I just don't know how to, I'm just trying to get stronger, I'm trying to, put on some weight, I'm tired of being pushed around, some stuff like that. That's something understandable, but at the exact same time, you still need to properly execute how to use a dumbbell, how to do curls, same way how you need to know how your freedom of speech actually works. And then that's the problem of how do you tell the difference between a person who is clumsy versus a person who is weaponizing their clumsiness to attack the people around them. It's the same way of how do you tell the difference of a person in terms of, now we're going back to the political sense, is how do you tell the difference between a person who is genuine versus a person who is weaponizing that morality in order for them to stick up their countrymen, in order for them to rob them and to centralize their wealth into their political agendas. Well, just like from my deconstructed example, you have to know how to do a curl. You have to know the proper etiquette on how to use that weightlifting equipment. And your equipment is how you exercise your freedom of speech appropriately, not in terms of how you feel it should be executed, but how it is supposed to be executed without violating the private property rights of other people and the consent of other people. Because again, those are two core tenets within the Communist Manifesto, where Marxists, socialists, or communists always use these tactics in order for them to subvert your consent, or to subvert your private property rights. And that is where our freedom of speech is purely exercised, is through our private property rights. Because you can't simply just walk into someone's house or walk into someone's establishment and establish what you believe that they disagree with, because they have the right to kick you out of it. Now, that does not mean that your freedom of speech is violated, but that's what these people want you to believe. They want you to believe that it is a violation of their freedom of speech to walk into someone's establishment or private property and say exactly what they want to say, despite the fact that it does not align with the owner of that private property. Like, I just can't walk into any black person's house and just start blasting the N-word with the hard R, or the same way I can't walk into a Jewish person's house and start talking about, oy vey, are you drunk on Christian blood, which is a very old anti-Semitic viewpoint, only to be kicked out of that person's private property, which that is rightfully so, only for that person to be going, my rights are being violated. My right of freedom of speech, of being able to walk into your private property and say what I personally want to say within your domain, within your kingdom, within what you owned, and violating your consent to substantiate what I personally believe in, because I need you to believe in what I believe in, but I can't convince you otherwise. And it's not only something that happens in reality, like in real life, it also has the same applications within the online space in terms of social media. And what examples do we have of that? Well, it's called audience capture in terms of, like, on YouTube, like a platform like YouTube. I am so sorry if you heard that music in the background, but like I was saying, an example of that would be audience capture, where the audience who is slowly growing and giving, super chats and donations and money to a YouTuber to regurgitate the exact same points that they've already claimed to, and they want them to elaborate, and they want them to not just only elaborate, but also to affirm what they already know, what they believe in, by having this one person with over 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000 or 1,000,000 subscribers to substantiate what they already believe in, because it's not enough for that individual to believe in what they believe in. They need that person who also has amassed that digital number of a large number or a large crowd to substantiate the exact same thing. It's kind of like the same thing, because it's one thing for an individual to say what they believe in. It's another thing for a person who has 1,000,000 or 2,000,000 subscribers to substantiate what you also believe in as well. That also strengthens your point. And then oftentimes that YouTuber would put themselves into a corner to where the only thing you can do is just give what the audience wants and just give into their beliefs. Because, you know, sometimes they'll say something that is antithetical to what their audience honestly believes in, and because they do that, they get punished by their audience for that, by no longer giving super chats, dislike bombing their videos, no longer donating to them. Like, they affect them financially for not giving their quote-unquote correct opinion in regards of the social issue that they want the YouTuber to talk about. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's not a violation of private property rights. That's not a violation of a person's consent. But you would have to ask yourself this other question: is a YouTuber's income based on donations and super chats not considered coercion based on the audience demand for them to rehear their opinion regurgitated back to them by a person receiving their income? Just like how you need to ask the question, is it not coercion for a person who owns a private business to not give in to the demands of social justice in terms of protecting minority groups or LGBTQ, or protecting the straight white man, or protecting quote-unquote freedom of speech? Is that not also a form of coercion? Because not everyone is obligated to protect people simply based on their identity, such as being a minority, or black, or Latino, or Asian, or white, or male, or female, or gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual, queer, so on and so forth. But you don't want to be a racist, right? You don't want to be considered an Uncle Tom. You don't want to be considered some type of racial epithet where you're betraying your people. You don't want to be considered Hitler, or you don't want to be considered a white supremacist, do you? You don't want to be considered a Zionist, do you? You don't want to be considered anti-white, do you? You don't want to be considered... No, fill in those labels and then ask yourself this question: are you genuinely accepting these things, or are these people genuinely accepting these opinions as opposed to being coerced to accept these opinions? Because once you accept those terms, not only are you accepting the political ideology's demands, you're also accepting the fact that you don't have private property rights, nor do you have consent, nor should you acknowledge the fact that your consent was clearly violated through means of coercion. And that's what ultimately ends up happening. You end up giving up your private property rights. You end up forfeiting your consent to a person or to a group of people who are violating your freedom of speech. They're violating their rights to violate your rights, to get you to accept the fact that your rights have been violated. That's the trick. And that is exactly the type of tactic that the woke right and the woke are generally using in order for them to push their political agendas within society to invade the subcultures. So remember, the proper way of fighting back against improper methods, such as subversion, is to ultimately understand how your rights work. Ultimately understand how your freedom of speech works, and that ultimately your freedom of speech starts and only can freely operate in terms of private property. You can say how much you hate the Jews and how much you hate black people and minorities and LGBTQ groups within your own private home and those who ultimately agree with your positions. However, your freedom of speech stops when you're in someone's private property or their kingdom, their own personal kingdom, and you're trying to spread something that you believe in a space that you do not control, you do not own, but they control and own, and they do not condone that rhetoric, or they do not condone that speech within their private domain. And you would think a lot of people would know, well, this is how freedom of speech works, but again, philosophy is something that is rarely taught in today's public education or private education, or even hell, it's rarely taught in college. And if it is taught, it's usually taught in the form of biasness, to where it is teaching the new generation to violate people's private property and consent. Well, that's all I wanted to say to today's video. If you agree with what I have been saying, explain to me why do you agree with what I'm saying, and if you don't agree with what I'm saying, then please kindly explain in the comment section as to why you disagree with what I'm saying. Dislike the video, and I hope to see you guys next time I come out with a video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Take care.